Dive in. Thanks, Liz. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jared Duval, now chair of the Science and Data Subcommittee. This is a meeting of the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council, Tuesday, November 12th at 1:30 p.m. We are sad to have lost Colin Smythe as our co-chair, given his departure from his role at the Agency of Natural Resources to join the staff at VTrans. But we are going to continue on. Wanted to start with just a brief overview of the agenda. Liz, thanks so much for sharing screen there. I can also, if anybody wants it directly, believe that is it in the chat. But primarily, aside from approval of the minutes, I think the main thing that we want to make sure that we do is review the proposed structure for the revised climate action plan that is due in July of 2025 and pull out the 4 pieces of the proposed structure that have been assigned to the Science and Data Subcommittee and look at the timeline that we have for the drafting of those pieces and make sure that we're clear on who is volunteering to draft those pieces and our process for getting those drafted and approved. And in support of that conversation, we've got some helpful resources. Thanks, Liz, for attaching those documents. And then we'll have some time for public comment to discuss our upcoming meeting schedule and future agendas. May also want to take some time, it's not listed here, to talk about subcommittee composition. We did receive, as I mentioned before the recording started, there's a couple of members of the committee who, given employment changes, may have moved on. And we actually also received some youth nominees for the youth seat of this subcommittee, which we should discuss. And then, yes, we'll also discuss upcoming schedule and future agenda items. Does that all sound good? Any comments on the agenda before we dive into that? Okay. So let's start with the approval, the review and approval of the minutes from our last meeting on August 9th. I'll put those in the chat. What was that? There was only, and first I should say thank you to Liz for volunteering to take minutes for this meeting, which is incredibly helpful. One thing that I noticed on the August 9th draft minutes is in terms of page 3, number 3, the pathways update. I had volunteered to be a part of that alongside Ken Jones and Claire McElveny, who had also volunteered, but just my name was missing from that next steps list of the committee members who'd volunteered to be part of the task group. Oh, hi, David. Good to see you. I think we now officially have quorum.
Jared, I had a couple of minor things. If you scroll down to page 2, I'm just curious whether you see any highlights. I don't know whether this document is live or not.
I don't see any highlights.
Okay, so under the work plan and subcommittee role, the second solid bullet and then the first open bullet, the first line that reads the updates to the climate change projection and impacts chapter include, is there a word? It sounds as if those things are currently included. Is the word should missing there? So it's that first open bullet.
I think that's right. Does that sound right to you, Dr. Dupini-Giroux? I think that sounds right. That it should say there should be a should before include.
Hey, folks, you should know there's a group of people on another Zoom call. The link that, anyway, the link that Jared sent around goes to another location.
I'm wondering if people are joining the Zoom that Colin had created.
Well, it's the link you sent when you noted people shouldn't go to that one. You said you can go by, you can, get there by this, and that's the one we went to. And
I included a link to I believe I had included the link to, where is
Can
this?
somebody just join that meeting really quickly and give them the
Give them the
correct
right-
link?
Yeah,
I said I was going to try something else, and I can go back to that one.
that would be great, Ken. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
I had just a couple of others at the bottom of page 2 under the measurement and progress map. It says that the kickoff meeting is August 19. Is this something new? So August 19, 2025, or this was August 19, 2024?
That was from the most recent kickoff, I believe. So it would be 2024.
So it should be was August 19, 2024.
Yeah, this was just, these notes were taken prior to that occurring. So that's why. But yes,
Yeah.
it
Okay.
is now. It happened. Yeah.
And then this is kind of a general comment. I'm looking down at kind of the top of page 3, the first full bullet point, solid bullet point. It's talking about the PUC and the CHS and ANR and GWSA. There's places where acronyms are spelled out and others where they aren't. Just from the point of view of posterity, or the unlikely chance that somebody not familiar with these things would read these notes, should those things be spelled out? Just, it's a rhetorical question. Some places they're spelled out, acronyms are spelled out, and others they aren't.
Hi, everybody. This is Richard Hopkins.
Hi, Richard.
A couple of us were at the wrong address, and so we're just joining the meeting now. If this is okay, I want to point out that in these minutes, the very last thing in the minutes says that I'm going to do something. I, Richard Hopkins, are going to do something, and I don't remember volunteering to do that, and I don't know what it was, and I haven't done it. Okay, so whatever it was.
We can delete that last bullet point
If you
before
wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate it.
One more correction on page 2 in the next steps. If we could update the spelling of my first name, please. It should be Lesley -ANN.
matching the correct spelling that's at the very top of the attendance. Yes, great.
Thank you.
Liz, have you caught all of those?
Yeah, I got some. Thanks. And back to your earlier point, we'll update the acronyms to spell them out so folks can know what they are.
Thanks, Liz.
Yep.
And this is just a small thing. I noticed that in some places it refers to a member doing something, and in other places, specific members are called out. Is that just because we didn't catch names or whatever?
I'm not sure. CBI took these notes. CBI took these notes at the last meeting. So I'm not sure why there is a differentiation.
Yeah.
But going forward, I could make it
Just
clear
curious.
who's doing what. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other requested corrections to the minutes? If not, with all of the corrections noted and requested, are folks comfortable approving this set of minutes?
Motion to approve as amended.
Great.
Second.
Seeing second and nodding. And anyone opposed? Okay, great. We will approve them with those corrections and move forward. Before we dive into the review and, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, just in regard to those minutes, I mean, there is the reference to this work that would be taking place with regards to the measuring assessment progress tool. I don't, I was on a subcommittee identified. I don't think any of that happened. If it did, I just wasn't part of it. So, these minutes reflect something that, that was now 3 months ago. And so, and I also think that's a topic that's hugely important in the development of the next climate action plan. And I understand that it's not to measure progress, even though it's called measuring progress. But still, I don't know what's happened there.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that may have been affected by the departure of Colin from A&R, who had been the staff lead on that. Maybe before we dive in, I know that Secretary Moore had mentioned that she's only available until 2 o'clock and she has to go to another meeting and has some updates. So before we dive in on the proposed structure and the kind of science and data subcommittee areas of responsibility for climate action plan chapter drafting, let's turn it over to Secretary Moore if you're willing for some updates from A&R.
Sure, I'm happy to provide a couple of updates. The first one I wanted to flag is around the contract with the Stockholm Environmental Institute and therefore our ability to move forward with the business as usual case. I'm, excuse me. I'm unsure what was shared at the last meeting as I wasn't able to join you. But we had some challenges working through sort of the state's process for overseas contracts that really slowed our ability to contract directly with SEI. That said, that at this point, that contract has been fully executed. My understanding is the team met with SEI last week, and I think there's a shared expectation that they will be able to complete an update to the business as usual case by the end of this calendar year. And as part of that work, they are going to look to calibrate the model against historical emissions, which I know is something folks have expressed interest about previously. There's also on the books a longer meeting with SEI in December, where the climate office staff will be working to lay out a plan for the workflow for scenario planning for the CAP. And once we've sort of had that internal meeting, I fully anticipate the Climate Council will update, the Climate Office will update the Council, as well as cross-sector mitigation and science and data subcommittees about the overall timeline for that work. I can stop there for a second, Jared, if you want, or jump right into providing a even briefer update on the measuring and assessing progress tool.
If it's okay to pause there, I do have I at least have a question about that, and I don't imagine others may as well, or that it's at least good to pause to see if so. My question about it is that we, both in cross-sector mitigation subcommittee meetings and in science and data subcommittee, have identified volunteers that would like to be involved in a pathways update, given the number of questions and concerns about kind of assumptions and methodologies. I'm really glad to hear that update, that SEI will be looking to update the BAU and the pathways. I'm just wondering, is there clarity yet around when the counselors who volunteer from the relevant committees will be able to, I mean, if we're talking about an update by the end of the year, I think it's important that those members would have the ability to share feedback before that update happens so that those questions can be addressed.
Yeah, so I think my understanding of our planned approach is the business as usual case sort of is defined as it is. We can use additional data to calibrate it, but when you're talking about pathways, that's what will come after that longer December conversation between the climate office staff and SEI, and they will effectively have a proposal to bring forward to both the cross-sector mitigation and science and data subcommittees for review, comment, input, et cetera. And that work won't proceed absent having the benefit of those comments.
Any other questions on that update? Okay. Secretary Moore, do you want to share the measuring and assessing project progress tool update?
Sure. And so as Ken's comments sort of alluded to, the work on this project did suffer a bit of a delay with Colin's departure, but phase 1 is underway. And my understanding is the data governance team has a meeting set for next week. Phase 2, which is building the tool after we have kind of that data governance structure, would launch sometime probably in earlier mid next year. But so work is underway in terms of the measuring and assessing progress tool at this point as well.
And is there an update on, just so folks on the subcommittee know, who's on the data governance team?
I don't have that at my fingertips, but I don't know, Liz, if you have it. If not, I can reach out to Jane and see if I can get that information. But my understanding had been it's several of the folks on this call, or at least other representatives of their organizations. So if you give me a minute, let me see what I can pull up, unless Liz has that handy.
Yeah, apologies. I don't have that, but happy to reach
Okay.
out to Jane.
Looks like David Grass had raised his hands from Department of Health, and Claire says that she is on the team. I know that, or I believe that Lena, EAN's data manager and research analyst, is on the data governance team. But in terms of others, unless folks speak up, I guess we'll just wait for that list, but that'll be good to know.
I'll speak up and say I don't know that I'm on it. I'm new UVM extension. I'm out of the Middlebury office. So I'm just I'm extension agronomist. Certainly an area of deep interest for me, and I'm a soil scientist with 20 years of studying soil carbon under my belt. So, but I'm just here learning today.
Great. So, Sean, thanks for speaking up. Can you just share a little bit more background on what prompted you to join the meeting, or are you representing from another subcommittee, or just an interested?
I got an email, and someone sent me the email and said, you might be interested in this. Like I said, I started with UVM Extension College of Agriculture in August. Yeah, I'm a new extension agronomist. I'm filling the position that was formerly held by Jeff Carter out of the Middlebury Extension office. Okay. Like I said, 20 years of soil carbon experience. My previous institution, I was teaching research and extension, and most of my research has always been around managing soil carbon, building soil organic matter, and soil carbon sequestration for soil health, but also for climate mitigation. I was on a couple of climate smart projects in Kentucky. I'm coming from Kentucky State University, so yeah, that's kind of how I ended up here.
Well, thank you for joining our call today. Glad to have you, and also just note that there is an agriculture and ecosystem subcommittee of the Climate Council that you may be interested in, and that may benefit from your experience and expertise as well. But
sure, I'll hang out and listen more unless you all need me.
Sounds great. Thank you. Great. Secretary Moore, were there any other updates or information that you wanted to share before?
I did get the list from Jane, and I will see if I can figure out how to copy and paste it into the chat as well. But it includes representatives from Public Service, VTrans, ACCD, Ag Agency, Department of Health and Emergency Management, Labor, Agency of Digital Services, BCGI, UVM, League of Cities and Towns, the Energy Action Network, and then VEIC. And if I can copy this little graphic, I will absolutely paste it into the chat.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that the next step is to share and look at this proposed structure for the 2025 Climate Action Plan. I don't know, Liz, is that something that you might be able to screen share? Thanks. So just as context and background, this outline for the revised cap was reviewed, I believe, first by the steering committee and then by the Climate Council, and it kind of breaks it down by chapter, starting from the outline of the previous climate action plan passed in 2021, and there are 4 pieces in here where the kind of primary responsibility for drafting is assigned to the Science and Data Subcommittee. And this is very much consistent with last time. So there is as you can see, kind of in the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 5th down, maybe climate change in Vermont. That will be an update that has been assigned to the Science and Data Subcommittee. And then right below that is the Vermont energy economy and opportunities related to climate action. There is a suggestion, as you'll see in that 3rd column, to rename that chapter title, but that is also assigned to science and data. And then the 2 others are on the 2nd page of this outline. There is the scientific underpinning of the climate action plan. And just for clarity, that had 3 short pieces to it last time. One was an overview of the social cost of greenhouse gases. Second was the greenhouse gas inventory review and supplemental accounting. And then the 3rd was the carbon budget. And then the last piece that's assigned to the Science and Data Subcommittee is this section called the benefits and burdens of energy choices. Although and that's on the 3rd page, Liz, if you scroll down. And although I will note that I want to make sure, and Liz, maybe this is a question for you or for Jane, that was actually part of the cross-cutting themes chapter that is slated to be taken out or addressed in a different way. And so I didn't know if that was an error. I looked back at the initial climate action plan, and that benefits and burdens of energy choices was like 1 page. I think it was 3 or 4 paragraphs, and it was just a subsection within the cross-cutting themes. So that to me, I think is a question. But I think we can at least start with clarity on those first 3. And I won't ask people to go into, or Liz to share the very detailed but very helpful spreadsheet that has it's kind of a Gantt chart for the drafting timeline. I will just summarize it in a very simple way, which is to say that all of those 4 pieces that we just identified as cap chapters or components assigned to the Science and Data Subcommittee, they all have the same timeline proposed in that chart, which is starting the process January 6th of 2025 and finishing the draft by March 3rd of 2025. So looking at a 3-month process for that chapter drafting, review, and finalization, so that those drafts can then be reviewed and incorporated by the full council, passed
I
on.
believe that's actually 2 months, Jared. Just
Oh, yes, 2 months. Thank you, Ken.
Jared, there's a piece that you didn't mention.
Yep.
That where the one called cumulative assessment. Did you talk about that one?
Oh, no, right, because that starts with cross-sector. Good catch, Richard. Yeah, I think that And that is something that is going to have to be, I believe, on a slightly longer timeline because it is dependent on the update of the pathways analysis. In part, but thank you for flagging that. We should add that to the list, even though that will be, since that will be in collaboration with the cross-sector mitigation and subcommittee and the climate action office. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
My work here is done.
Not done. That's great. Okay. So I want to defer to let's just take these one at a time. I think the main goal here is to identify we've already started this process, but I think last time we didn't have this full list, and so we were only looking at a couple of these portions. I think for each of the chapters that have science and data next to them, we want to identify kind of a lead author, a lead organ, or at least organizer of the process, and any interested co-authors, so that we can, between meetings, begin the drafting process and then agree on what that process looks like, so that we can have drafts ready for review by the subcommittee. I think the first one I want to defer to and pass over to Dr. Dupini-Giroux, who led that chapter last time and with the initial climate action plan, and has offered some really good thoughts about updating it this time.
Jared, and I have a few slides to share. I think there are 5 in total. So Liz, do I have permission right now to share?
Oh, let me check. Yeah, you do. You should be able to.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Try to share a little bit too soon. It says you're still sharing, so.
Yeah, I just stopped it if you're gonna try
Okay.
again.
Let's see. Is that visible now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, got some thumbs up here. All right, so let's pop this into. All right, so these are just some slides that I put together to help frame where we're gonna go with some of our discussion today. So they're all draft, and I'm just gonna move myself out of the way here. So if you remember back to the last time that we met, I think it was a few months ago now, some of the folks who had volunteered to assist on the writing of this climate change in Vermont piece were Breck and David, Tara. And since then, we've had some other folks sort of express interest in helping out with this, including Chris Campany, who's back on the council itself. And I've also reached out to a number of colleagues at various state of Vermont agencies, as well as federal agencies that are based here in the state itself. So just to sort of frame up some of this, what I did is to sort of highlight where we were in the original climate action plan and what I envision sort of carrying over, and then some of the new pieces in here. So before I do that, I'd like to sort of recognize and highlight Dr. Jay Schaefer, who was instrumental in helping to write some of this the last time around, who is now no longer in the state and therefore not officially a part of this science and data subcommittee, but has offered his expertise, particularly since a lot of the diagrams and the thinking and the data analysis and manipulation, he was sort of central to. So he has generously offered to continue sharing his expertise. And I think it'd be helpful to us to really sort of lean into that. So Some of the things that we had last time that I would love to see sort of carrying over this time are centering the Abenaki ways of knowing. There's a diagram at the very beginning that Judy Dow had created that sort of shows the relationship across not just our natural systems and human systems, and the ways in which Abenaki peoples walk softly on the earth. And so that is a diagram that I'd like to see continue on into the second version of the cap, and also again sort of lean into a lot of the work, the framing, the figures, the data, the projections coming out of the national climate assessments. And when we did the 2021 version, we were just a couple of months ahead of where things were coming out from that perspective. And so now that the fifth national climate assessment was released in 2023 November, we actually can sort of really use those and sort of drill down deep into them. And sort of related to that is the US Global Change Research Program and the ways in which they frame out and set up the National Climate Assessment. And so for alignment purposes, looking at some of those mapping procedures and recommendations, again, sort of something that we did in the first climate action plan, and then sort of leading in again in this update, and continuing to use all of the Vermont specific information, the graphics, the resources that come out, not just from the state itself, not just from various agencies and entities across Vermont, but a number of federal agencies and partners like the National Weather Service and so forth, and also the Northeast Regional Climate Center. So some of the things that are suggested include changing the title a little bit from climate change in Vermont to climate and climate change in Vermont, to sort of broaden out the ways that we're looking at this from a natural systems perspective, and to really sort of lean into the science of what we're talking about, the risks in terms of exposures, vulnerabilities from all perspectives, people, land, as well as the infrastructure pieces, and to really sort of center people in the framing of this particular part of the document itself. Last time we met as a subcommittee, we had a very robust discussion in terms of economics in Vermont, and particularly with regards to some of the practices and solutions that we're putting forward. And so my suggestion at that time, and again now, is to sort of really lean into the economic impacts of climate change in Vermont in its own piece, so that it really gets the justice that it deserves in how do we actually think about and work through it. Because we have a number of questions that have been raised, particularly by our members of the public who join us and ask about how much is this going to cost, who's going to pay for it, and some of those pieces in there. Another piece that I'm putting forward as a new section is on human health and well-being, which is a very purposeful crosscut to the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, and the very strong focus that human health is being centered in that subcommittee as well. And so at this particular point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stop sharing and turn this over to David Grass so that he could say a few words on the human health and well-being pieces.
Would it be okay if I shared a couple slides?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, can you see my slides? All right. So Leslie Ann extended this gracious invitation the last time when the CAP was being developed. The health department was in the midst of responding to COVID-19, so it was really gratifying that we can be substantively involved this time around. So I responded to Leslie Ann's request with a draft outline for what a health section could look like. And I just wanted to give a quick overview to what some of those key messages could be, what some of my thinking was behind them, mostly because I'd love to solicit input from folks in terms of the direction that I'd like to go and whether that seems to be a good fit. So a lot of my thinking got kicked off as frequently happens, from a Vermont public story that I heard on the radio and a quote from Ted Brady, executive director of VLCT, that because of the floods, there are less investments happening in regular paving projects. He said, because of the floods, there are less investments happening in public safety. Because of the floods, there's less investment happening in water and wastewater infrastructure. And that quote resonated with me because with the flooding this year and last year, it seems like there's a lot of suffering that's happening among Vermont's population that is not captured in the health statistics that are collected by the health department. And so I wondered if there would be a way to sort of zoom out and get a better understanding of what the opportunity costs are when there's a diversion of a community's resources from the normal public goods and services that they'd be investing in as a result of the impacts of extreme weather and climate change. There we go. So this is a busy graphic about health impacts of climate change. And I just want to discriminate between those impacts that are normally thought of as being direct, that climate change is exacerbating some sort of environmental exposure, and that directly affects people's health. And those are things that we can capture when people go to the hospital or go to the emergency room. And those statistics are things that the health department can capture. This has been the traditional focus of programs like the Climate and Health Program at the Vermont Department of Health. But it omits some of these indirect impacts that are more about how climate changes the environment that we live in, the society that we live in, the agricultural systems and infrastructure systems that support not just our economy, but also our well-being, our physical health, and our mental health. And there's been a lot less attention, certainly at the governmental level, also in research, on these indirect impacts of climate on human health. There has been some good focus within the realm of mental health on psychosocial impacts and indirect impacts. This is from a paper back in 2011. So there's been more work in sort of the mental health arena. But most of the health department's focus has really been on the types of health impacts on the left here that are direct, that there's an injury or a disease or mortality associated directly with it. And that type of work has been done before and it's well documented, and it shouldn't be omitted from a report like this, but I'm wary of going down the same route of repeating just these direct impacts with just this like very mechanistic micro, looking at things through a microscope, but maybe missing the big picture. So I want to make sure that we're capturing the big picture. And that's consistent with what's thought of as like public health 3.0, which tries to focus more on what are the upstream conditions that are the necessary prerequisites in order to support health and human well-being. It also resonates with me because a lot of the failures of the health department in our initial COVID response were illustrative of we thought we knew how to address health inequity in Vermont. The initial rates of testing and COVID outcomes showed that we were ineffective, certainly with our initial approaches. And so there's been a real focus at the health department and nationally on addressing health inequity as integral to how you practice public health. And as part of that practice, you need to look upstream to what are those conditions that create those inequities and that result in disproportionate impacts and higher levels of disease and mortality among certain segments of the population. So an approach to looking at health impacts on climate change from a higher, more macro level is consistent with that public health approach. as opposed to where our focus has traditionally been, which is just on sort of downstream outcomes, morbidity and mortality. So to that end, some of the new messages that I would like to focus on are stating plainly that there are both direct impacts and indirect impacts, and that we should care about both those direct impacts and the ways in which climate change affects housing, economic, social, and environmental conditions that are necessary in order for good human health and well-being. Secondly, and this is a message that has been part of the health department's messaging, that some people are more impacted than others, but sort of getting deeper into the why are some people more impacted than others. And we now have enough experience with climate disaster in Vermont that there are compelling stories that we can tell about a lot of these populations. And so trying to be illustrative, trying to be people-centric, to talk about some of the specific ways in which these subgroups, which represent a large portion of Vermont's population, how they are adversely impacted by climate change. And lastly, that in our design of interventions to try and address human health impacts of climate change, if we're just focusing on those outcomes and trying to prevent heat illness or heat-related mortality, it's sort of too late if you're just focusing downstream on not addressing those health inequities, not addressing the causes of those inequities, but just focusing on the health outcomes. So the most effective interventions will focus upstreams that get at the sort of the root cause of inequity. And in that way, ideally, you are addressing both those inequities and giving people, greater resilience to the instability, disruption, stressors that come along with climate events. And started to think about, potential ideas for like call out boxes around some of those populations that I mentioned before, that tell more of the whole story of the experience of climate change in communities. If a community is struck, multiple times, there might be great resilience the first time around, but that the community response the second time around is going to be different. And what are the mental health impacts of those sort of repeated events? So that's my thinking initially, and I would invite anyone who's interested in the topic or has feedback for me to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, Richard, please go ahead.
Hi, David. We haven't met. I'm Richard Hopkins. I'm a recovering epidemiologist, but it's been a little while since I worked full-time in public health. 3 things for you. I like the emphasis on upstream. What sometimes gets lost is that when we do effective mitigation, that is, we reduce CO2 emissions to the atmosphere, or CO2 equivalent emissions to the atmosphere, the people who benefit the most are the people most at risk from adverse consequences of climate change. So the people whom you list in that excellent slide with 15 or 20 different categories of people at risk, those are the people that benefit the most when we do a good job of mitigation. So we shouldn't forget that effective mitigation is in fact a blow in support of climate justice. The second thing is that I sent you separately while you were talking the text of an article that I had on the Addison Independent a few months ago about climate migration, and you may find it helpful or maybe not, but you'll have it anyway. And the third thing is, if I can help with this project that you're working on, I would be glad to.
That's very generous of you. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard. Claire, I see your hand up.
Well, I just want to echo that framing really resonates with me, and I feel like it really resonates with the conversations we've been having in Just Transitions, where I'm, staff member. So I feel like if you were interested in a sounding board, or as you get further along, it could be maybe interesting to present to that subcommittee to get their feedback and also hear kind of cross-pollinate. I think we've been talking a lot about how to ensure that equity in the CAP doesn't just live in the sections that subcommittee's drafting, and this feels like it really supports that. And the last comment that I was thinking through is when you're talking about the call out box, or ways to kind of bring this to life, is I was wondering if it might be interesting to chat with Sophie or other folks about some of the engagement efforts, to not just have like data and facts, but actually quotes from some of the work they've done or other engagements, because I feel like that could really just, emphasize what you're thinking about.
That's a great suggestion. Thanks. And I would love to share an outline as we get further along with the Just Transitions Committee to solicit feedback. That's great. Thank you.
Cool. And I'm happy, they meet once a month, so I'm happy to help coordinate as it's helpful.
So thank you. Oh, sorry. I saw you come off mute. Leslie Ann, please go ahead.
I was about to say that's exactly the sort of reaction I was hoping for, because I think in the original version of the climate action plan, it's a little bit on the dense side, and folks don't always see themselves represented in it. And so going to a more people-centered approach and working more directly with all of the engagement efforts that we have going on in these multiple paths would be a great way to sort of integrate lived experiences with some of the science. And so that's why I really want to sort of center a lot of the people way of looking at this. And I'm really happy that David, you did such an awesome job on putting together all of these pieces in here, because it sort of really elevates a lot of the thinking in terms of how to move some of this forward. And it also allows us to do that cross subcommittee piece in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past. So really happy that all of this is sort of coming together. There are a couple other things that I wanted to highlight in terms of some of the rewrite, and one of it has to do with aligning with the state hazard mitigation plan. And I think that's where Tara and Breck could lean in terms of bringing some of those hazard pieces a little bit more forcefully into some of this. And then there's also a last piece going on right now, which is the resilience implementation strategy, which is looking very, very specifically and strategically in terms of where resilience planning takes place across all of the entire state, and the better way that we could interweave a lot of this so that they're not in competition with each other, but sort of speaking to each other and elevating each other as we kind of step on through. So those are the last pieces, Jared.
Great. Thanks so much. So we'll talk timeline in a little bit, but one thing that I want to do is just make sure that we have clarity about leads and participants for the drafting process. This seems like the one that is underway. Thank you so much for stepping up, Leslie Ann and David and Tara and Breck. Richard, it sounds like you were interested to I don't want to state or over. I had also noted your name in the minutes from last time. So if I just want to make sure we've got the list of interested subcommittee members.
If I can assist, I would be glad to.
Great. Thank you.
And I know what I'm saying this time.
Great. Okay, so it seems like we've got a good team there for that drafting process. We'll come back to the timeline. For the next chapter, the Vermont Energy Economy and Opportunities Related to Climate Action, that was the old title. There was a recommendation to change the title to the Vermont Climate Economy, Energy Resilience, and Opportunities Related to Climate Action. Sounds like, based on what you said, Leslie Ann, about the previous section of climate change in Vermont that was economic impacts of climate change, there may be a way to weave that piece into this chapter and have more of a holistic economics focused chapter related to climate and energy. last time around, Ken Jones had played a lead role in that chapter. I want to see, Ken, if you are interested in continuing that role, and if there are others. Oh, Breck, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, sorry to divert here just a second, Jared, but I had one simple request and a clarification. The request is I wondered if Leslie Ann and David would be willing to share those slide decks so that we could think about them. But my question is about kind of the extent of the scope of this chapter. And it actually does relate to this conversation about pulling out the economy section. The title of the section, as it was, and as Leslie Ann has suggested to change it, is about the climate and the climate change. And so the suggestion to me, and as I look at the original document, is about those things that describe the nature of our climate and how it is changing. When we talk about the economy and when we talk about the human impact of that, those are crucially important, but it seems to me that they are the consequences of those changes. And so I'm just wondering if those pieces need to be pulled out and highlighted. So, we're talking about pulling out a section on Vermont energy and economy. I'm wondering about pulling out a section that really focuses on what David presented in his presentation. And I'm not 100% sure about this, but it seems like kind of impacts on the environment is lost in here. So should we be pulling out a consequences or a set of consequences sections?
So almost like a separate health chapter, like we have a separate economy chapter.
Exactly.
Rather than embedded in how the climate is changing.
And that health chapter could be a combination of a human health and an environmental health. It could have two pieces to it.
One quick reaction to that, Breck. Awesome suggestion. I think it would require a little bit more in-depth discussion with the folks in rural resilience, because they're the ones who are really leaning in heavily to the public health. And this was designed to be parallel and sort of each speaking to each other, each elevating each other. So I think it's a great suggestion. I think we should probably have that discussion a little bit deeper. And David probably has some insights, because David's colleague, Jared Elba, is also on the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, where they have an entire task group that's just devoted to health. And so David might have some insights that I haven't heard about yet. David?
I don't have any insights that would shed light on how to best parallel their approach. I do think having one chapter on climate change in Vermont that has to do the work of describing the climate change and human health impacts, I think it is a difficult pairing. Maine in their 2024 assessment, scientific assessment, paired health and economic impacts in a chapter called Human Dimensions. So I'm sort of agnostic as to where the content lives. I should do it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, if I could just jump in again, this is a lengthy and dense document as it is, and so avoiding duplication to the degree that we can is something we should strive for.
I wonder if for now, since there seemed to be a lot of really positive reaction to the overall structure that both Leslie Ann and David presented in terms of the content, if we can proceed with the drafting and then as a next step figure out what we break out,
Sure.
But at least have more on the page to work from and then figure out the structure and flow at a next. Does that sound all right to folks? Okay.
And I
Tara.
trying to get myself off mute here. It does, because I think that was sort of at the back of my mind the last time around, where we had climate change in so many different places, and some of it was synchronous, and some of it was actually a little bit on the contradictory side. So to the extent that we try and do this in a more concerted manner, so it looks like there's cooperation and one voice across the entire thing, it would just make it a little bit easier for the digestion purposes. So there's also that. And I'm going to take this opportunity to say welcome to Sean, because one of the places that we can do some more streamlining is with agriculture and sequestration and how all of this kind of fits together. So there's a lot to sort of chew on and delve into. There's so many opportunities. And sorry I jumped over Tara and Ken.
No worries. I was actually going to just suggest the same thing that Jared ended up saying, in terms of if we kind of draft the outline, start plugging through the sections, it may make sense at some point to see, depending on the content, how to kind of differentiate and pull things aside. Because David, I also especially appreciated your call out for Ted Brady's quote on the infrastructure piece, because it is aging everywhere, hammered by the climate events and a direct impact on human health in so many ways that doesn't often get acknowledged. And then the other piece was related with environmental degradation and security, which is something that we've done a lot of work in at Norwich, more on the global context, but even specifically in Vermont, right? Especially in rural areas, trying to make sure that a degrading environment, which results in loss of employment and so on, and how all of that connects, could fit in the economic piece, but it could also fit in the resilience piece. So I think just being able to lay it all out and see what content we generate and then separating things makes a lot of sense. And one quick note, I'll put this in the chat, but I just saw this piece today about microplastics in the air, resulting in more cloud formation and therefore more rainfall events than otherwise. So just adds to the mix of the discussion that we're having here.
Not just in the air, but coming down in rainfall, from what I read. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Tara. And Ken, I see.
So yeah, I'll start by, I am willing to provide what I can in terms of leadership on the Vermont energy economy piece. And I agree with the discussion here about taking the economic impacts of climate change and, we'll update them. And because of the addition of more emphasis on resilience, it is resilience to many of those economic challenges. Using flooding as the example, resilience is addressing what is a very, very significant costly piece. So I see that connection. But yeah, short answer is I'm willing to take a leadership role. Please sign up and I'll do what I can to coordinate. And I'll take, also the economic piece from the first draft climate change and update that. And then, as we say, we'll have that content to work with to see where it best fits.
Great. Thank you so much, Ken. That's great. I'm also happy to help work with you on that, although I'm really glad to hear you step forward to play a lead organizing and drafting role. Is there anybody else who would want to be part of a drafting group with Ken and I on the economics focus chapter? Breck. Oh, you're muted, Breck.
Sorry, but again, I'm just seeking clarity. I want to be sure. So are we talking about going ahead and drafting narrative now? But there could be other people, other groups that are drafting narrative as well. That seems inefficient to me. I mean, are we in agreement across all of the groups about what the framework of this is going to be and who's responsible for what? That's what this document in front of us is.
Yeah.
It seems that if there are multiple groups that are drafting similar narrative, that is an inefficient way to go.
I don't think there are multiple groups drafting similar. So I'm working with this proposed update as this is what we've agreed to as the outline for the revised climate action plan. And that responsibility column assigns responsibility by subcommittee. So I think we're deciding amongst ourselves in the science and data subcommittee who's going to take lead on each of these chapters. So there's not another subcommittee who's going to be drafting our chapter. So as I understand it, Leslie Ann is our lead on the climate change in Vermont chapter with help from others. David is going to be leading either a subsection of that on health or a separate chapter on health. And then Ken was volunteering to lead the chapter related to economic impacts of climate change and the Vermont energy economy. So I'm just trying to go through these chapters that the council has agreed are going to be comprising the revised climate action plan. And of the chapters that have been assigned to us, get clarity on who from our subcommittee is in a lead role and who would also be part of a drafting group before we bring those drafts to the subcommittee and then to the council.
Okay, it just sounded to me like there was the opportunity for some redundancy there.
So Breck, I think what you're on to is the fact that there is redundancy right now. And it sort of behooves us to talk about that and work through that before we even start putting pen to paper, because otherwise we're going to end up with parallel things. And the concern with the parallel things is either they're going to say the same thing or say something slightly different. And the people who could have been working on it together weren't. And I think that's what your comment or your question was, right? Because then it becomes the inefficiency that I think you're alluding to, where we could use our expertise jointly speaking across all of the subcommittees across the council a little bit better if we do some of this talking ahead of time.
Exactly.
So I just want to pause there. I'm curious what redundancy is being identified. I'm just working from this outline as what was.
Yeah. And I think that's what some of the challenge is, Jared, because redundancy is in terms of actual words and content in the draft. And so if you look at, for example, page 176 in the actual plan itself, that's the beginning of the agriculture and ecosystems piece. And it goes back and talks about some of the things that could have been pulled out and put in the that framework piece in there. And similarly, with rural resilience, they actually refer back to the climate change in Vermont in ways that they probably could have shortened if we had done this a little bit more coherently together. So I think that's what Breck was asking about. And I think we actually have, the weeks this time as opposed to the hours and days that we had last time to pull all of this together. So it becomes more of a streamlined and coherent document.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone from the Climate Action Office has additional thoughts about just the process. I do think it'll be important that there's opportunities for check-ins, as a steering committee, as a full council, to see how things are progressing and then compare those drafts. But I think our initial opportunity to avoid redundancy is just getting agreement on the outline and the chapters and getting initial drafts. I think some of it we may not be able to see until we've begun the process. Although an initial attempt has been made to split up the subjects. But I hear folks that there will likely be some areas of overlap and connection for sure.
Yeah, I think that's right. And to kind of start the process of outlining, identifying who's going to be leading what for each chapter, but to the point of I think for public health, for example, once you start digging into that, I think as questions arise, I think Leslie, you named it with rural resilience, they have a public health task force. So to make sure then at that point that you're complementing the work they're doing, not deducting it from it. So I think as it comes up, certainly we're encouraging different subcommittees to reach out to other subcommittees if there's any. This has happened with overlaying interest, even if it's not necessarily a cross-cutting issue. So we're encouraging folks to connect with each other as things arise. But I I think right now it also makes sense to yeah, move forward and identifying it, and then as it comes up, you could certainly reach out to those folks.
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple of folks who will be key, right, in terms of as we have drafts and, like Climate Action Office staff being able to see where there might be connections between different subcommittees, or with the liaisons between the subcommittees who are aware of what's coming up in the different drafts. But just in terms of clarity and being able to move forward, I was thinking that we could at least get clarity on, our chapter responsibilities and our leads. So is it okay to continue with that process? So is there anybody besides Ken and I who would like to participate in the drafting of the economy focused chapter? If not, that's totally fine, and we'll share a draft. Hey, the scientific underpinning of the cap, I am certainly happy to take the lead in updating the social cost of greenhouse gases section. Should have said this up front, but our recommendation to update the social cost of greenhouse gases for purposes of the cap and benefit cost analysis that happens in Vermont was unanimously adopted at the last Climate Council meeting. So I think we're essentially just have to update that section to reflect those updates, adopting the EPA estimates that resulted from the National Academy's recommended process to update the social cost of greenhouse gases. The other two pieces of the scientific underpinning of the climate action plan was a page on the greenhouse gas inventory review and supplemental accounting, and also on the carbon budget. My understanding is that there is not an update to the carbon budget, so I don't know how much new information will be there. My understanding is also, however, though, that we will have an additional, well, the planned timeline for A&R was to release another inventory that goes through 2022 by June of 2025. I don't know how Colin's departure as the lead author of the inventory will affect that timeline, but I can see that may be a subsection that may need to be delayed depending on when that position is filled and the timeline for the next inventory and forecast. But given that I said I'd be happy to update that, take the lead on drafting that update on the social cost of greenhouse gases. Also happy to work with the Climate Action Office and potentially Colin's replacement on those other sections, if that sounds good. And I think the cumulative assessment of action on carbon reduction for 2025 and 2030 requirements. Cross sectors listed as the lead subcommittee there. We would work with them. I don't know. Maybe at this point, I'm the liaison to that subcommittee. I'm happy to speak with those chairs and those folks about how they want to approach that. Maybe for now, we just pause and see who on this subcommittee would want to be part of a drafting group assessing the cumulative actions proposed for their carbon reduction potential relative to the 2025 and 2030 GWSA requirements. Ken, is that a volunteering hand or a question or comment?
No, it's an observation that I made at the last meeting. I mean, it seems like this topic is, so closely aligned with the measuring progress tool, and the
Yes.
response we got in August was, "Oh no, it's not." But yeah. So
I think that
I would ask I think they'll finish phase 2 in time for us, but phase 2 is just the identification of measures. But, how many heat pumps, how many electric vehicles, and the relationship of how many heat pumps and the reduction, which EAN did a nice piece of work on earlier this year. Same thing with electric vehicles. How are those electric vehicles actually reducing the vehicle miles traveled by internal combustion engines? I mean, that is progress. And I don't understand how, and in fact, I find it hard to do the next iteration of the climate action plan. And if we don't understand what's happened in the last 3 years with regards to some of those fundamental strategies. So I would, another reminder to the Climate Action Office that there is a relationship between the Measuring Progress tool and the Climate Action Plan.
So I want to go to Tara and Richard, just one clarifying thing before I do. And I would just note, building on what Ken said, my understanding is that the Measuring and Assessing Progress tool is primarily backward looking up to the current, what action has happened and what is it resulting in. Whereas I think what this cumulative assessment chapter will have to be is looking at the proposed actions. If they happen, do they add up to meeting the legal requirements for pollution reduction by 2025 and 2030? So I think this chapter would be more forward-looking, prospective. What can we estimate with what degree of confidence in terms of the recommendations adding up to meet the future year reduction requirements versus a Measuring and Assessing Progress tool being backward looking in terms of assessing what has happened to date. That's my understanding of the
2025 is, I mean, especially the 2025 requirement is through 2024. And
yeah, so this might be a typo. I think this actually is a holdover from the last plan in which 2025 was a future year requirement rather than in this plan, it will be a current year.
Okay, then there needs to be a piece that says, okay, what has happened in the last 3 or 4 years, and make that relationship between the specific activities that people have undertaken in the different sectors that contribute to the greenhouse gas and climate change, what has happened, and relate it to the recommendations, but also say, okay, what have we learned from that so that our future recommendations are informed by the experience. And I'm afraid that is not going to happen, in which case, I think we're missing an important update in terms of the climate action plan.
Tara, sorry, I had seen your hand.
No worries. I'm all set. You can go to Richard. Thanks.
Richard, please go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Richard.
As the Quakers would say, the friend hath spoken my mind. I very much agree with Ken's posture here. When I first looked at the 2021 Climate Action Plan, I was really puzzled by the document because I kept looking for the plan. There was all this language about what we ought to do, but I kept looking for a plan, something that had quantitative, measurable, time-limited goals that said who was going to do it and how it was going to get paid for, looking forward for the time span that this plan covers. And it was hard to find that kind of material in the current plan, and I really hope that we do a better job of it this time.
Thank you both for those comments. And sorry to be, I'm just cognizant that we're past our public comment timeframe, and I do want to create space for that, but and I don't want to be too laser focused on this. I just want to make sure that we get names next to chapters so that we have a path forward for drafting, even as we're also taking on board this really good reflection and advice on broader issues. When it comes to the cumulative assessment of action in terms of the future year requirements, that we would work with the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee on, is there anyone who wants to raise their hand as being part of that review and chapter drafting? Although I think that may be on a longer time frame given the modeling delays. Richard, is that a new hand? Or is that's your old hand? Okay. Well, I will check in with cross-sector mitigation subcommittee about that. And hopefully they will lead on that and we can play a role. And then on this last one, before we kind of assign anybody to it, I do want to make sure that it's not a typo, because it was this benefits and burdens of energy choices was originally in the cross-cutting themes chapter that had been identified as one to take out and do in a different way. So we've got Leslie Ann as lead on climate change in Vermont, Ken as lead as the economy chapter, and I will lead on the other pieces. And we've got that information in the notes. And then we should talk timeline and upcoming meetings in terms of our process. But before we do that, I do want to just pause to see if there is any public comment. I believe everybody here now, either a member of the committee or, Sean, you've been participating throughout. Is there?
I've been listening. And I started to jot down here in the chat. My skill set may be better served in the Ag and Ecosystems Committee. So I don't know. I'm not an energy specialist by any means. So if you want to direct me to them or refer me to them somehow, I'd be glad to participate.
I'll send in the chat where you could view the calendar and all the meetings, and you'll see when Ag and Eco is meeting next.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Liz. Okay, so timeline. We have done. Oh, Claire, go ahead.
Sorry, just before we move on, I hear Ken's comment, and I do feel like that's an important piece. It feels like it can be separate from the measuring assessing progress. But like
Yes.
I mean, I think many of the drafting subcommittees did an exercise of identifying what recommendations move forward, what are in process of implementation. And I just wonder if that sort of reflection on what's been done will occur in those chapters that those drafting subcommittees and task groups are developing. And if not, maybe there's a space for an introductory chapter that didn't need to exist in the first cap because a previous cap didn't exist yet. So maybe it's an addition that can be added to do some broad strokes reflection on what was advanced from between then and now and where we're going, or maybe it just gets embedded. But it feels like there's multiple places where it could sit, and that we still have much. I mean, maybe not all the data we'll have once the measuring and assessing progress tool is complete, but I'm sure we have some key data points that could be.
That's a great point. Almost like a stock taking. We had an initial plan. Now we're revising that plan, but what did that initial plan result in? And what? Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that, Claire. So I think we have had many, many times as a subcommittee where Colin sent out polls to try to find a time that worked for everybody, and nothing ever did. The closest we ever got was this Tuesday afternoon slot. So he had reserved before he left future meetings on the Tuesdays of January 14th, March 11th, May 13th, and July 8th. However, given the and I'm kind of loath to adjust those at this point, given how difficult it's been to schedule this subcommittee in the past. However, if the drafting timeline is, ending at the beginning of March, and we only have one additional meeting scheduled between now and then, I think we're probably going to want to add a meeting as a subcommittee in February, so that those drafting groups have some dates to work backwards from, and so that we have meetings to share drafts and provide feedback as a subcommittee to each other. What do folks think about that? adding one meeting in February so that we have two meetings rather than just one before our chapters are due.
Agree.
All right, Jared, don't we also have the meetings, because we alternated between a Tuesday and a Friday slot? So I have a meeting on my calendar for December on Friday the 13th. And so I imagine there may be one on the calendar, and let's see if I can find it. February 14th. It's just on a Friday, not a Tuesday.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, this is sorry, my apologies. I think this is the last big transition with Colin's departure. So we do have meetings for December, Friday 13th, Friday, December 13th, and Friday, February 14th, Claire? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, then maybe that is sufficient. I guess I would defer to each of the chapter leads in terms of a proposed timeline and process and how you want to use those key check-in dates and when we have drafts ready for review, what feels doable and appropriate. Lesley-Ann, Ken? Here, let me see if I can.
I can try actually to get some preliminary, it'll be iterative, but to get some preliminary updates for the December meeting. Actually, the January meeting will be harder to generate material for. But for the December meeting, just as one piece of our assignment, we can review some material that I can develop between now and then with Jared's help.
So I have those as the next 4 meetings. Apologies, I don't have the times. I think one of the things that we're going to have to do is delete the Tuesday meeting invites that Colin sent, and have Liz resend them. So for Liz to be able to start and record the meeting, it has to be an invite from her rather than from Colin. So let's keep those times for now, but don't be surprised if you see the original deleted and a new invitation at the same time added, but it'll be from Liz rather than Colin. Is that right, Liz?
Yes, thanks.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Ken. That timeline sounds great. And whether that's slides and outline, whatever ends up being most useful to gather feedback as part of the drafting process, that's great. Lesley-Ann, what are you thinking?
I was about to say, since all of us here who volunteered for that piece haven't had a chance to talk yet, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth and come up with something that doesn't work for a lot of people. So begging the indulgence of the subcommittee to give us just a few days to actually work through that before saying what we're going to do for the 13th, for example.
Okay. So we can check in offline, but we've got our chapter leads and those task groups can gather and meet outside of subcommittee time to move the process forward. And then I would just ask Ken and Lesley-Ann and maybe David or anybody else when it becomes relevant, please don't have, I should have said this at the beginning. My understanding is that there is not capacity at A&R or another state agency at the moment to have another state employee step up as co-chair of this subcommittee right now. So I have been asked to, in that absence, just act as a sole chair right now. And that's not a unique situation. I know that Andrea Wright is doing that for rural resilience and adaptation, which isn't ideal for her either. So I would just ask, if anyone has suggestions on agenda components, please don't hesitate to reach out, and especially as part of the review process would really welcome knowing what would be most helpful to you all in terms of scheduling those meeting agendas. Liz has very graciously agreed to check in with me ahead of the meetings to make sure that we have the draft agendas posted and emailed out to the subcommittee. But yeah, especially ahead of the December 13th meeting and the January 14th meeting, especially the chapter leads, if there's anything in particular you want to request time for or suggestions on the agenda formation, please let me know. I'll also make a note to reach out beforehand, but I just wanted to say that verbally right now. Okay. Anything else about subcommittee meeting schedule, drafting process, or timeline? Right now, I will hold for a presentation from Ken, whether that's an outline or from some slides for updates. We'll wait to hear back from Leslie Ann and that team until they have a chance to connect. I also wanted to let folks know that my understanding, I got an email from Elena Mahaly at the Conservation Law Foundation. Folks will know that CLF, or folks may know that the CLF issued a notice of alleged violation to the Agency of Natural Resources and has proceeded with a lawsuit. And one of the questions that came up is the methodology and the assumptions behind the forecasts predicting compliance with the first Global Warming Solutions Act emissions reduction requirement. My understanding, and please correct me if I am wrong, but my understanding from this email that was forwarded by Elena from the Attorney General's office is that the Agency of Natural Resources, via the Attorney General's office, has requested that CLF take up that modeling question in front of the Science and Data Subcommittee. So my plan, in terms of a transparent, fair process, is to give both ANR and CLF the opportunity to present on how the modeling has been done, what the assumptions are behind it, what the questions and concerns are, and then give this subcommittee a chance to ask questions and make a recommendation. Since the Attorney General's office is pointing to this subcommittee as a forum, as an appropriate forum alongside the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee for those questions. So I think what I want to do, and I would welcome input on this, is to reach out to the chairs of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee and see if there is a time that would work for both of our subcommittees to host that type of presentation and review process and forum for deliberation, so that that can be done in a transparent and fair way. I mentioned that to Secretary Moore. She had to leave, but she had suggested that that sounded good to her. But I think that that's, in addition to this chapter drafting process, I think we're going to need to carve out time on a future meeting agenda for that opportunity for those issues to be presented and questions to be raised about them. I'm anticipating at this point that may have to be part of the January meeting. I had missed, as Claire had mentioned, the Friday the 13th meeting of December, and I am recognizing that that is now a conflict for at least two people on this call. So I'm wondering, A, feedback on that general approach, and B, I'm starting to think it may make sense to actually just do our next meeting in January and then have the January, February, and March meetings. since I am not going to be able to participate. I did not have those Friday meetings on my calendar. Breck.
Yeah, Jared, I'm just curious. I like the idea of A&R and CLF, providing testimony, if you will, to our subcommittees. I do wonder, though, how that relates to the legal challenge that CLF is making. So they provide testimony to us, and so what? I mean, we don't have any sort of authority, really, to adjudicate that.
I agree. I'm just following the guidance that was requested from the Attorney General's office and from CLF, that they requested that the Science and Data Subcommittee and the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee be a forum for discussing these issues. I think that there will be a separate issue in the legal process, but I'm just trying to be responsive to the Attorney General's office and to CLF and to A&R in terms of a requested forum that would be outside of the legal process.
Do we have any sense of how long it will take for that legal process to play out? The reason I ask is that in one scenario, if that were to happen quickly, which I doubt very seriously, it seems more logical that we would take the results of that deliberation in the courts and say how it impacts the climate action plan. But if it is drawn out, which seems more likely and doesn't fit into the timeline of the development of the new draft, I just think it needs to be clear about kind of what the role of the Science and Data Subcommittee is. That it's not going to adjudicate things.
Right.
Anything. It's just gonna listen to these and try to address how that could affect the plan.
I think that's right. I don't think we have clarity on how long that process will take to play out. I also agree with you that we don't have decision-making authority. That is the agency, but we do have advisory, an advisory capability. Those are really good and fair questions, and it's a complicated process. David and Ken.
I'm just feeling all sorts of alarm bells going off in the back of my head about participating in a meeting that could be used as evidence in a court proceeding when I'm an employee of the state in a case where the state is being sued. So I'm just anticipating that, if I ask the legal and policy folks at the health department, whether I can participate in that meeting, that might be complicated. So just wanted to flag that.
Thanks, David. Yeah, it's Ken?
Yeah, I that's quite a bombshell, Jared. But my read of the request is to review not to look at its impact on the climate action plan, but rather to review the material we were provided largely at the end of 2023 that led to the Agency of Natural Resources determining that we were on track to meet the 2025 target. And a lot of that information did go through us. But if you could get a sense of timeline, I think this could very well slow down our work on the climate action plan. And I think it might be okay to start in April with their request, because it is going to be a long drawn out case. But that's a big topic. And I hear, the concerns of the state agency folks, they're going to be in a sticky wicket. So if you could find out timeline and see if there's any way we can do this in April, I think that, because our work on the climate action plan is going to take our 3 months of time, December, January, February, I think. And I have to go, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Well, I will follow up with each of those parties. Again, I'm just trying to be responsive to what each of them requested. But I fundamentally agree with you, Breck, that the authority does not lie with us.
mean, it would seem reasonable maybe that we could review the projections of the state and review the objections of CLF and say how that relates to the plan, you know, and I don't know, David, whether that would kind of get you off the hook with respect to them physically being in the room and providing testimony. It's just, these are public documents that the Science and Data Committee is reviewing.
Yeah, I don't know either, Breck.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know we are past time. My apologies for that. I will follow up with each of those entities and appreciate the questions and comments, and we'll incorporate all that into timing of future agendas. But I think at this point, we should plan on the next meeting being January 14th rather than December 13th, because I know that there are multiple conflicts beyond what is normal for that December 13th meeting. And let's use that extra time, or if folks want to use that time as scheduled for chapter kind of task group writing time, that's great. But let's plan for the next full subcommittee meeting to be January 14th, and between now and then be working primarily on the chapter drafting and outlining process. Does that all sound good?
Jared, just wanted to thank you for having all this extra free time that you've got to be able to take on these responsibilities.
Thanks. This is important work, and I'm glad that we're all in it together. Thanks everybody for stepping up, and be well, and look forward to seeing you at our next meeting.